Instead of standing in line at the coffee shop, staring at your phone, think about like how you could redesign the coffee shop to make it more efficient or more engaging or more fun. So it's like you have to practice the creativity and the creative thinking.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into Nodes of Design to help support our mission spread knowledge. We have a very special guest in today's episode. Let's welcome Matthew Holloway, who is a design leader with over 25 years of experience and has co-founded 6 startups after holding leadership and executive roles at Apple, WebMD, Shutterfly, and SAP, where he shifted their strategic direction with his team's innovation, delivering increased customer value and market share. Matthew has been collaborating across organizations to help executive teams fully engage design as a key differentiator for their businesses while helping design leaders make the shift from creative thinkers to business executives. Many of the designers he has managed and mentored have moved on to take up executive roles at companies such as SAP, GE, Oracle, Google, Meta, Amazon, Apple, Nike, and more. Matthew also advises early-stage startups on how to effectively balance their investments in technology, design, and marketing to maximize their roadmap's impact. In this episode, Matthew had shared great insights on design for scale. We had started the episode by breaking down scale and discussed about some of the challenges that you face while designing at scale. Later then, we spoke on how do you balance creativity and innovation with the need to scale quickly when designing for large organizations. And then we spoke on how to approach user research and testing when designing at scale and what are some of the most effective methods that designers could use. Then we spoke on what role does collaboration play at design at scale and how to encourage cross-functional collaborations and ensure everyone is aligned with the design. Later then, we spoke on how to ensure accessibility and inclusivity when design at scale and what are some of the best practices to follow. We concluded this show by few tips by Matthew on how to measure success of a large-scale design project and different metrics to use. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and on every Friday, we release new episodes with different creative leaders from around the world to help you better understand different concepts related to design. So don't forget to tune in into Notes of Design every Friday. With that being said, happy designing everyone. Hi Matthew, welcome to Nodes of Design. It's a pleasure hosting you today on our show.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for having me.
So how was your day so far, Matthew?
Well, I'm up in Seattle and Washington. It's a little rainy this morning, but promises to get sunny by the afternoon. So it should be a good day.
That's great, Matthew. So could you give a brief about yourself to our listeners out there?
Sure. I'm a designer who's been designing products, digital product services for over 25 years. I was educated with an industrial design degree. After graduating from there, I went to what was at the time the largest design firm in the world, a place called Richardson Smith, where I started doing interaction design. And then I went back to graduate school and got a master's degree in cognitive systems engineering. And then I went to California and started working at companies like Apple and Netscape. At one point, I was recruited by Hasso Plattner, the chairman of SAP, to come in and do a organizational transformation around design thinking and to kind of bring design thinking to the organization and embed it in the development processes and the tools. In the 4 years we were there, we changed a number of their products, the development processes, et cetera. And since leaving SAP, I've co-founded 4 startups, worked in 7 startups, and built a number of high-performing design teams for small businesses, bigger companies. I've also done coaching and mentoring with other design leaders. And currently, I'm head of global design at SnapLogic, which is a data integration company, helping them build out their design team. They have not had a design team previously. So we're building out the team and also putting in place a design-led product development process there.
That's wonderful, Matthew. So what was your journey into design and how did you start? And what are your tips to the beginners on starting the design journey?
So my journey is a little different. I think when I was a kid, my dad was a carpenter and we had a wood shop. And I spent many hours in the wood shop making all sorts of things. And so I always made stuff. I was the kid who was much more fascinated by the box the toy came in than the toy, because I could make something else with the box. And so growing up, I saw a TV interview with this industrial designer. His name was Raymond Loewy. And if you don't know who Raymond Loewy is, you should definitely look him up. Designed everything. He designed planes, trains, cars, packages. He redesigned the Coca-Cola bottle. The iconic Coca-Cola bottle we know today was his design. He even designed Skylab, which was like the first space station kind of thing. And so I saw this interview and I'm like, wow, you can get paid to like do this. Like, this is like the coolest job ever. So from the time I was, I don't know, 10, 12 years old, I knew I wanted to be a designer. So I went to design school. I went to Ohio State. At that point, they had a fantastic industrial design program. I've always done design. So getting into design, kind of as a second career or as a, growth opportunity, I've mentored and coached a lot of people who are making that transition. And, I always encourage them that, you can take a boot camp and, you could, but there's a lot more to the history of design and the context of design than what you're going to get in 6 weeks. And so that's like the design, like if you go to a university, the classes are, 10 or 15 weeks long. And so that's the equivalent of one class out of like a 4-year program. And so to put it in perspective, you still have years of work to do to really fully understand. And like I said, I've been doing this for 25 years and I learn things every day about design. So it's not enough just to take a boot camp and say, I'm a designer. It's a lifelong commitment to kind of keep going. And, I have friends, one of the guys that I worked for at this place, Richardson Smith, Dean Richardson, Dean is still active. He's in his 90s and he's still like actively involved with design education and the World Design Organization. And, it's a lifelong endeavor. So
thank you so much, Matthew. So let's begin our episode today with designing with scale. So what are some of the biggest challenges you have faced when designing at scale and how did you overcome them?
I think before you answer that, you have to define what you mean by scale. So there's lots of different ways that you can think of scale. There's scale in terms of, I have a cool mobile app and I want it to go viral and I want everyone in the world on my mobile app and anticipating what the consequences of that means. So for that scale, you have to have both the ability to kind of do the localization, going beyond just simply translating it into a different vocabulary, but the images and the color choices, the interaction patterns, the expectations you have of the information that your users are going to share with you, all of those things are contextual to the society in which that product's being used. And then you also have to think about the scale of the infrastructure and the performance. So, if you have, 1 billion people using your product, the infrastructure has to scale up to match that. And the performance of the design has to match that as well. And I think, that's one aspect of it. And then the other type of scale is more of a horizontal scale where you're creating a design for a product, knowing that you're going to release 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 other products in that suite. And so designing at scale for that requires, potentially you could also have 1 billion users on the platform. SAP is a great example of that. But there it's also about creating a design language. So there's, in the last, few years, there's been a big push around design systems. Design systems are, to me, kind of the words in a dictionary, right? They're the asset that you have. But the design language is how you put those things together. It's how do you construct the sentence, as it were. And so you have a grammar and a vernacular to it that has to be expressed both in the form and the interaction of the product. And so when you're designing at scale for that, it's a very different, it's a different mindset. When I was a kid, I fell in love with Tolkien, like The Lord of the Rings, but I actually got more fascinated by how he designed the story. And he created, a dozen languages. He was one of the guys that wrote the Oxford English Dictionary, so he understood language very well. But he actually created multiple languages, different dialects within those languages, and that part of it always really stuck with me when I started exploring this idea of design languages. I'm like, yeah, this is like a similar type of thing where you actually have to construct the vernacular and the kind of the prepositions, as it were, of how they string together, right? And so that's a different type of creating at scale. So, and then you run into issues of large design teams versus small design teams, and how do you maintain the consistency across the board? How do you maintain the alignment within the products? And that gets into more leadership and management than, say, design per se.
So how do you balance creativity and innovation with the need to scale quickly when designing a large organization?
So again, like creativity and innovation aren't really the same thing, right? Everyone is creative. They may suppress it. They may deny that they're creative. They may be embarrassed that they have some creative idea. And, frequently growing up, the creativity gets suppressed. Later on, you're going to ask me about one of my favorite books. And one of my favorite books is Orbiting the Giant Hairball. And it's a book about creativity and how to maintain your creativity in a large organization. The author of that book interviewed or met with kids at a elementary school. And he met with each class individually. So just the kindergartners, just the first graders, just the second graders. And for each class, he asked them the same question: who here is an artist? And the kindergarten kids all raised their hand super enthusiastically and were really excited about it. And as he progressed up, most of the first graders did, a lot of the second graders did. But by the time he got up to the sixth grade, there were only 2 kids that raised their hands. And they were looking around very nervously at their friends, making sure they weren't going to be judged or made fun of for being artists. And so, we get the creativity kind of pushed back. It's like, I know growing up as a creative kid, it's like my teachers used to get super frustrated with me because when I took notes in class, I would often draw pictures of the idea as opposed to writing out the word because it meant more to me and I could create connections between it. And it was a dynamic aspect of it. And even in college, I did that. It really freaked out one of my professors when he saw my notebook because he just thought I was doodling. And then I walked him through what all the things meant. He's like, okay, you got this. But that kind of creativity, oftentimes in a business setting, for example, is really shunned. It's like the challenge is that for innovations to be valuable, they also have to have creativity. Innovation is like a team sport, right? So it's like there's a playing field, you have a team, you have rules. There's always going to be opponents, whether they're your competitors or even people inside your own organization who are adverse to change. And so, it's really innovation is about how do you channel that creativity in combination with the ability to prioritize and to execute, to iterate, to validate, to test with your customers, to really identify which emerging technologies are going to be the ones that you want to stick with and which ones are going to be a flash in the pan. And at the end, it requires delivery. An innovation that doesn't ship isn't an innovation, right? It's just an idea, and we all have ideas. Within the idea itself, like you have to nurture it and care for it. It's like being given an egg. It's like you can't just toss it around because it's going to end up very sad. But I think those 2 things in combination, being able to encourage the people on your team to think creatively and to give them the exercise to be creative. I encourage people to just spend 30 minutes every day. It's just like, if you do a morning workout routine or a meditation, you should spend 30 minutes every morning just doodling and looking at stuff. And instead of standing in line at the coffee shop, staring at your phone, think about like how you could redesign the coffee shop to make it more efficient or more engaging or more fun, So it's like, you have to practice the creativity and the creative thinking, but, within a large organization, you have to make a safe space for people to be creative and give them permission to be creative and encourage that. And then you still have to have structure and discipline when you're driving that innovation to delivery. And that makes it a little more challenging to kind of balance those 2 opposing ideas of working without boundaries and providing boundaries and constraints to yourself to make sure you're focused in the right direction.
Thanks, Matthew. So how do you approach user research and testing when designing at scale? And what are some of the most effective methods that you have used in the past?
So the user testing and user research in general, my experience is that every organization is different in terms of how they ingest and how they view that. There are some companies that I've worked in, especially, startups that are disrupting a market or, bringing something to a consumer space that has never been done before, right? Those tend to view this as a waste of time because the founder has come up with some idea that leapfrogs, any thinking anyone could ever possibly have done. So how could you possibly research that? Because this is a whole new paradigm. I think that's wrong. You still need to, if you have an infinite supply of cash, you can definitely release the product, see if it's going to work or not, and hopefully pivot quickly before you burn through your cash supply. But other companies, it's more ingrained. A lot of companies have co-innovation programs with their customers where they actually have a formal schedule of working with their customers. So I think first you have to kind of understand where your organization is at in that spectrum, and then tailor the user research program to meet that organization and to push it forward. The company that I'm at now had never had user research before, and so I hired a colleague who I'd worked with previously to come in and run this user research program. After her first user research study that she did, on this new product that we were releasing. She sent the report out, sent it to the CEO, and he confessed that he was at first very skeptical that this would have any value at all. He just thought it would be like a really fluffy, kind of report. Good user research really digs into the problems and the opportunities and makes recommendations, and they're part of the team, right? They're not just kind of saying like, yeah, you get a B- or an A+ on your design. Our CEO wound up like taking that report to every meeting he went to, and he would ask people, it's like, why aren't you doing work like this? Like, this is great work. Like, we need work from the marketing team, or the sales team, or the engineering team of this quality. Like, let's go. And so we were able to really convert him into supporting the idea of user research, which was fantastic. I think, being able to kind of plan out that transformation is part of the design, if you will, of your design organization, to kind of figure out how you're going to get the user research that you want, and who are the people you have to bring along to make that successful. If you have an existing product that's different, where you can instrument it, you can get data from the field, you can, look at the telemetry on how people are actually using the product to frame up more insights and to kind of use that to create a qualitative research instrument that then you can convert back into a quantitative. So you're kind of fluctuating between the quantitative and the qualitative. So you can use the qualitative to drive new ideas and new thinking, and then see like if you're right with the quantitative piece. And then, there again, it's like making sure you know what you're doing. There's a lot of people who will do a qualitative study. They'll interview like 10 people, and they'll come into the room and they'll say like, well, 80% of the people we talked to said they liked it. And I just it's like fingernails on a chalkboard. It's like, no, 80% of the people you talk to, 8 people that you talk to said this. It's not 80%. Like, this is not a quantitative study. Like, your sample size is way too small. Like, this is not statistically accurate. Like, it's one of those things I look for when I interview user researchers. It's like, if they slip up and like start trying to make their qualitative work into quantitative work, it's like, nope, you don't know what you're doing. All the products benefit from user research. It's just making sure that your user research is set up for success within the organization, and that people are ready to hear what you have to say is probably the biggest challenge of bringing user research at scale. Well, that and finding good user researchers. Good user researchers are very hard to find these days. So.
Thank you so much, Matthew. So what role does collaboration play in designing at scale? And how do you encourage cross-functional collaboration and ensure that everyone is aligned with the design and vision?
So to me, collaboration is like the lifeblood of any organization. When I was in graduate school, I did my thesis on collaborative software. So, this was before social media and before Google Docs and all that kind of stuff. And so there was specific pieces of software that would allow multiple authors, for example, to write on the same document, whether it was, like a technical document or code, like a code repository type of thing. And, it introduced all sorts of interesting dynamics around how people collaborate and what their expectations are and their shared understanding. And so like at that point, I realized it's like, if you can't effectively collaborate with your coworkers, you're probably not going to be able to drive that innovation to the market. You're probably also not even going to be able to be like, think creatively as a team, because you're all going to be working in different directions. I think this isn't unique to design either. It's like, this is true for every discipline and every company, every organization. And I think most leaders, most executive leaders and managers spend the vast majority of their time facilitating the collaboration. I spend most of my time working with my counterparts in engineering and product and marketing to make sure we're all aligned around the same goal. We have the same shared understanding. A lot of times the same word will mean very different things. Where it's like, if you're talking to an engineer and you talk about a component of the software, they probably have a very strong definition of what that is. Whereas if you talk to somebody in marketing, they may just toss that word out because they can't think of another word to say like, yeah, it's this little thing over here that sits with these other things, right? And so that kind of mismatch of expectations around what you're talking about leads to a lot of frustration in the collaboration. So, I've found this is where like the power of the sketch and the whiteboard come really handy, where you can draw a box on a whiteboard and you can draw a box next to it. And you're like, these two things live here inside of this other box, right? And the engineer is like, yes, that's a component-based object-oriented architecture. These blah, 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 blah. These services run back and forth. And the marketing person's like, yeah, sure. That works. Yeah. So being able to facilitate the conversation and the collaboration, I think, is one of the key things. And designers who sketch, not all designers sketch, believe it or not. But if you sketch and you're comfortable getting up at the whiteboard, get the marker early, take control of the whiteboard, and help facilitate the collaboration in the room. Whether it's physical or virtual, it doesn't matter. But just help really facilitate the conversation. Ask a lot of questions, lots of clarifying questions. Don't make assumptions. And so I think, collaboration is just it's like language. It's the type of action you take. So yeah, it's the basis of everything. So.
Thank you, Matthew. So how do you ensure accessibility and inclusivity when designing at scale? And what are some of the best practices that you suggest?
Accessibility is one of those things that can definitely be kind of baked into your design system. So you can make sure that the color palettes that you have and the icons and the page construction and everything are accessible, as well as, kind of translatable into other languages. I think the language itself, in terms of how you describe features and functionality in your product, also has to be considered in terms of accessibility. In addition to, the fonts and the colors and all that kind of thing, the paradigms that you use in the interaction and the language that you use in the interaction are also critical for accessibility. Also for inclusion as well. Obviously there's issues around self-identity and information sharing that you want to take into account. But for inclusivity, there's also expectations that you have to work through with your development team around the language that they use and the interaction paradigms that they use to make sure that you're not creating an environment which is not supportive of everyone and does not recognize everyone. It's an ongoing challenge for a lot of products to really think about it beyond, a set of checkboxes or, expanding, a set of options and menu. It's really more about your philosophy. The other piece that I would add into that also is the sustainability and the social impact of the product. I think there's a number of instances where people have ignored the social impacts of the product. There's a great article actually this morning about, the digital currencies and the impact that they have on the environment because they consume such massive amounts of electricity. People got super excited about that when that came out. And they were just like, oh yeah, this is going to be the new thing. And like paper currency's gone. And, the truth of it is, like, we can't afford as a planet to run, our global currency on a digital currency system right now because we don't have the right energy source to be able to power it. And the same with social media. When social media came out, like there was no long-term consideration to the impact that it would have, both positive and negative. And so I feel like those are things that also have to be explored and looked at, especially at scale. Whether it's the horizontal scale where you have a suite of products or whether it's the growth scale where you're trying to get everyone on the planet to use your product. Those things are often overlooked in the desire to just kind of create a lot of money. So
Matthew, how do you measure the success of a large-scale design project and what metrics do you use?
So again, this goes back, like each company is different, right? So some companies, are purely focused on the revenue and the shareholder value. I think the key thing is though that for every organization, kind of the highest level of the organization, they need to have a clear reason for why they're doing what they do. They need to have a shared understanding across all of the leadership and, cascading down throughout the entire organization of the shared understanding of what are the outcomes we want to achieve? What are the behaviors we want to change for the people using our product? What impact do we want to have on society and the environment? And, going beyond just kind of, dominating our market, it's like, what is it that we really want to achieve as a byproduct of what we do, not just, delivering value to our shareholders? 20 years ago, every company was focused just on shareholder value. Design actually took a very long time to catch up to that idea. Like early on, design was very much like it's just the right thing to do. It's self-evident, right? This is like a good design is, good design. It's, everybody looked at the letter. Thomas Watson, who was the CEO of IBM, wrote, the famous memo, like, good design is good business. And everybody just took that as like, okay, that's all we need. Like, that's our hall pass. We can do whatever we want. And it took design a long time to catch up to understanding like how to function as a part of a business. But businesses have since then moved on and they've expanded to include things like social and sustainable metrics that they want to achieve. And design is still playing catch up to that. And I feel like to really measure the impact that the design has, the design leaders need to start thinking about, actual viable metrics that they can apply to that. And each organization is going to be slightly different. There's a lot of people out there saying like, these are the three metrics you should use to measure design everywhere. It's like, probably not. Like they don't work in every company. You have to at least tailor them a little bit. And, the ironic thing for me is that designers, when you talk to a designer, they often frame themselves or their profession as the most adaptable part of the professions in like software development, or that, they have the ability to kind of look across a vast array of disparate information and synthesize it into a few meaningful patterns. And I think it's really funny that it's like, okay, so turn that lens on yourselves, assimilate that vast array of patterns that are out there, synthesize that data, and come up with some metrics that actually like, this is why design has an impact. This is why design delivers value to the customers. This is how design is, transformative in terms of the business, not just in the experience of the product. So I think, each organization has to come up with its own metrics. It's like I've been at SnapLogic now about 6 months, and the first few months it was just spent getting the lay of the land and connecting with the other leaders, and then working through how they would determine if design was actually having a success or not on the business. Adding to that the metrics I wanted to achieve for design. And so that's how we came up with our metrics, which work for us, but they wouldn't necessarily work for anyone else, right? Because our internal leadership has, their own unique understanding of what design brings to the table. So, a lot of it is just knowing how to create a meaningful metric, but working with your colleagues collaboratively to create those metrics. And then also building into their metrics. So for like the engineering organization, like building into their metrics, things like, engagement with the customer and spending time with customers or participating in the co-innovation sessions we're setting up, adhering to the design system, those kinds of things, so that everyone has a share in the outcome. Just like everyone has a share in the outcome of revenue, we have a share in the outcome of the engineering work. They should have a share in the outcome of the design work as well. And to really kind of make it a team effort to achieve those objectives. So
thank you so much, Matthew. This question has inspired me to ask you another question, which is not into the list technically. But since you have been in the industry since last 25 years and you have seen how the internet revolution also took up and how the number of UX designers were being added into the industry. So what are the major shifts that you have seen over this period of time?
Oh, with design?
Yes.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because there's a huge shift, I think, where initially, because I think of the pace at which the technology was evolving at that point, there tended to be a lot more introspection about what you were doing and what it meant. And so, there was time to kind of consider the impact of what you were doing. I was very fortunate early in my career to work with a number of folks who had been at Xerox PARC. So I worked with Larry Tesler, who was the person who invented cut, copy, and paste, right? So the conversations with him and also this other fellow, Austin Henderson, who had been there, it was just really fascinating about just how deliberate they were about the design and how philosophical they were about the design. And I think as the design profession grew and more opportunities, more companies were in need of designers, the practice of interaction design was, really solidifying. I was at Apple when Don Norman came up with the term user experience design. And I was like, I got to work with Don while I was at Apple as well. And it was really fascinating. Like his original idea of user experience was much more comprehensive than what we think of it today. Like we boil it down to like, oh yeah, I designed the screens and the workflows. And his thing was like, no, it's like everything from how you hear about the company to how you go through support, how you recycle the packaging, like, all of this stuff is part of the user's experience. And I think as more people have come into the profession, we have found ourselves as an industry, the tech sector has found itself a desperate situation where they're like, okay, you can come in and design my product. Like, yeah, you just did the 6-week boot camp. Like, you have no idea what the difference between a serif and sans serif typeface is. You have no idea what mental models are. You don't really understand human perception. But hey, I need somebody to make these mockups and these wireframes and go. So we've kind of, I'm trying to think of the right word, because I don't want to be disparaging of the folks who've come into design through that channel and learned. But we have lost a little bit of the richer philosophical history understanding of design and creative problem solving, really reflecting on the context that it sits in. Like, one of the things I'm really fascinated by is, I'll be talking with some folks and somebody will be like, oh yeah, user experience was invented in like 2005. No, user experience. No, that was like 12 years before that is when Don came up with this concept. And interaction design, which is what you mean by user experience design today, has been around since the 50s. It's like, I always make people go look at this video called The Mother of All Demos. It was done by Doug Engelbart and his team at Stanford. And it's a video, it's a film, actually. It was shot on 35 millimeter film from 1968. And he demos the mouse. He demos collaborative writing. He demos video conferencing. Like half his team is in San Francisco, half his team is in Palo Alto, and they're working on a document together on these green screen terminals with video, audio headsets. Everybody's wearing like their little thin black tie and all that kind of stuff and the big heavy glasses. But like, you realize it's like that's 1968. Like, that's almost 60 years ago, right? And so when somebody's like, oh, interaction design or design for software is like brand new, it's all new, like blah 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 blah. It's like, you don't understand the whole history of it. And the sad thing is, a lot of the people that they're going to be working with, like from product management or engineering, do know that. And they know that there's a much longer history for this. And so when you show up and you're like all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and frankly a little naive, you're not really doing yourself or the profession much benefit by not appearing to know what you're doing. Even if you're really good at your job, like when you talk about this is like, this is something that was just invented like last month. It's a menu. It's a drop-down menu. It's like, oh no, now it's called something else. It's like, whatever. It's a drop-down menu, And so I think that's one of the things I've really noticed is the change is that, and there doesn't seem to be much interest in understanding the history of design or the role that it's played, well over a century in terms of industrial design and the impact that it's had on shaping society. Now I can stop being a grumpy old man and telling people to get off my lawn. So
thank you so much, Matthew. That was really inspiring, and it will inspire a lot of young designers to start and look back into the histories before exploring into the field. So thank you so much for sharing all these wonderful insights with us. So could you please share with us, how does your day look like? Any interesting stories?
Yeah. So my day, I try to prioritize my day by 4 basic things. One is the customers, then there's the company, the team, and the individuals, right? So I try to prioritize around those 4 things. For the customers, it shouldn't come as a surprise. It's like spending time with the customers, really understanding their pain points, their needs, how they use our products, what we could do to make them more successful. It's like our system, can basically, like, the idea is we want to turn the people using our software into superheroes, for their companies. At the company level, then kind of, the next step, it's really looking at how we operate, what the strategy is, the cross-functional alignment, the collaboration between the different disciplines. And so, there's a lot of time spent just having conversations with those folks, making sure that we're aligned. It's like, how do we resource a project? How do we prioritize this project? What does this really mean? Do we know enough to really commit to doing this yet? Are we doing it based on a response that we need, or is it something we really need to tackle, right? And how do we want to approach it? And then there's the team, and by team, there's actually 2 teams. As a executive in the company or as a leader in the company, you have 2 teams. You have the organization that you're responsible for, but that's your second team. Your first team are your peers. And this is an idea that as I've coached and mentored people going into design leadership, this is an idea that's kind of hard for them to understand. That the number one team is their colleagues in product management and marketing and engineering and sales. Collectively, you're the team that's going to be setting the tone of the company, setting the priorities, but also embodying the values of the company. So a lot of companies will write their values, on a poster and they're like, here's our 5 values. It's like, that's great. But that's not the lived values. Like, unless those are actually practiced by the organization from the CEO on down, they're just ink on a page, right? And so that leadership team really has to understand how their behaviors, their comments, their actions are really setting the tone and the value for the organization. So, you may say that, you have a open, supportive environment that's safe to criticize and that kind of stuff on the wall. But if you're in a room and you're sitting there with, a VP from some part of the company, and you ask a question and they snap at you, like, you don't have an open, safe environment, right? If it's like working with your peers, you really have to help them understand that as well. But then for the design team, I spend a lot of time also working with the individuals and on the team, but collectively as a team, it's putting together the processes and the resources and the tools, really working to align those with the individuals, making sure that they can be successful collectively as a team, that the team's extensible and that we have the right mix of skills on the team. And then for the individuals, there's the people on the team, really making sure that they're growing and developing and they have access to the things that will help them achieve their goals. I combine both their helping them grow within the company, but also if I have somebody in my team who really, they would really love to say go back to grad school and get that master's degree and design management or, take some classes or, do whatever. I work with them to try to make that happen as well. It's not enough to just simply try to get them to be the best worker bee that they can be. They have to be the best person they can be. And that's looking at it very holistically. And I do the same thing for myself. So I take time to prioritize so I can continue to learn and grow as an individual, as a designer, and as a leader as well. So that's kind of how I break out my day in terms of the priorities.
Thank you so much, Matthew. So let's conclude our show by your 3 favorite book recommendations and people who inspire you the most.
I have to say, of all the questions you sent, this is the hardest one. Friends tease me about this, but I have a huge design library of books that I have every book on design ever written, I think. So narrowing it down to 3 is really, really hard. There's, some classics in there, Crucial Conversations is a great book to help you kind of prep for difficult conversations, whether it's with somebody you're managing or with your boss or with a peer. And 5 Dysfunctions of a Team is another great classic book. But lately, the ones that I've been digging the most, I think, books outside of design. So there's a book called Stolen Focus by this guy, Johan Hari. He explores how social media and mobile devices have really crippled our attention to maintain a long attention span. And he works with biochemists and neurologists, and he interviews dozens of scientists, both pro and con, on the view of saying, oh, social media is fine. Other people are oh my God, it's the worst thing we've ever invented. And so there's a range of perspectives in there, and he lets you draw your own conclusions. But I have to say, about halfway through the book, I deleted my Facebook account. It's okay, I'm getting off Facebook altogether. That book is fantastic. There's another one called The Dawn of Everything, which is it's written by 2 anthropologists. And this one is really fascinating because they challenge the assumption of as we evolved, from agrarian to urban, there was this natural tendency to create a hierarchical society. And they go through historical evidence, archaeological and anthropological evidence that says that's not actually true. They look at cultures from all over the world and how that did not actually happen. They also include other things like the impact that the indigenous people of North America had on Europe's understanding of democracy and setting up a parliamentary government, and that the folks that were here in this continent had operated successfully for centuries on a very open, flat social structure that allowed them to actually build cities and to do a lot of very advanced, types of things without creating a hierarchical, feudal kind of political system that created this social stratification. It's a really interesting read. It kind of makes you question a lot of the stuff. So those are some of my favorites. From a design perspective, I always encourage people to read the Orbiting the Giant Hairball. That's a great book. And then also, if you haven't read it, Designed for the Real World by Victor Papanek. This is a book from the 70s. Victor was one of the first people to point out the issues around sustainability and being able to design for long-term benefit of the planet and people. His opening sentence to the book is really fascinating. He's it's something like, there are very few professions more harmful to society than industrial design, because his premise is industrial design just encourages consumerism, and it encourages throwaway products, where single-use products kind of thing. And he really championed from both a business and moral and ethical perspective of approach to design that was far more sustainable and more long-term. And if you did need to replace something, it integrated back into the ecology much faster. So I really encourage everyone to read that book, because again, it's one of those things where it's like, people are like, oh yeah, design is like leading the charge on sustainability. And yeah, like 40 years ago. Yeah. Victor Papanek is just an amazing author, and he was a fantastic designer as well. So yeah, I would encourage everyone to read that book. So the people who inspire me the most, I get very easily inspired by a lot of people. From a design perspective, right now, Rachel Kobetz, who's the head of design at Expedia, I've had a chance to chat with her a few times and meet her, had dinner with her. Amazing design leader, just really incredible. And I think the same for Daniela George, who's at PayPal. Both of them are just incredible design leaders. They really, really inspire me. And then, it's like, it sounds kind of silly, but like, there's a couple designers on my team who really inspire me. They're both, they grew up in other countries. They immigrated to the United States, and they're just really passionate about design. And it's awesome, like working with them and seeing like how excited they are and how impactful they are with our company. So, but yeah, I get inspired by a lot of people. And some folks you've had on your show, like Bob Baxley. Bob and I have known each other for a very, very long time, and he continues to inspire me. If you don't see his daily posts, almost nearly daily posts on LinkedIn, you should definitely check him out. They're very he's like a Zen master when it comes to design. So
thank you so much, Matthew, for sharing all these wonderful recommendations. And we are looking forward to host you again in our upcoming episodes. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been great. I've been really enjoyed chatting with you. So